Déjà vu. You walk into a cafe you've never visited. New place. New conversation. But suddenly, everything freezes into something impossible. You've been here before, not somewhere similar. Here. This exact moment. The light hitting the table at that angle. The next word's about to leave your friend's mouth. Your brain screams certainty even as logic argues otherwise. Then it vanishes. The feeling collapses as fast as it appeared, leaving only confusion in its wake. This is déjà vu, the eerie sensation of living a moment you know never happened. The name comes from French, already seen, but it's not memory playing tricks. It's a timing glitch, a split-second error in how your brain stamps the present. Here's what's happening. Your brain processes experience through multiple channels. Visual information travels one route. Emotional context takes another. Spatial awareness follows a third. Normally, they sync up to create what you experience as no. But occasionally, one pathway lags behind by a fraction of a second. The present gets processed twice. The second time, it arrives stamped as memory. So you experience something new while simultaneously feeling like you're remembering it. It's not a storage problem. It's a labeling error. The brain tags the present as the past. Most people get hit with this a few times a year. It lasts anywhere from seconds to half a minute. Stress makes it more frequent. Fatigue does the same. When your brain is already working overtime, these tiny misfires become more likely. But here's the unsettling part. You can't argue with it in the moment. Logic doesn't matter. The sensation overrides everything else. For those few seconds, your brain is absolutely convinced it knows something it doesn't. The feeling fades. But the disorientation lingers. Because if your brain can misread the present this completely, what else is it getting wrong without you noticing? Jamais vu. You stare at a word you've written 1,000 times. You know what it means. You've used it without thinking your entire life. But now, looking at it on the page, the letters feel alien. The spelling looks wrong. You know it's correct. But your brain refuses to recognize it. This is jamais vu, the reverse of déjà vu. The familiar suddenly turns foreign. The name means never seen, and it captures the bizarre moment when something you know stops feeling known. It happens with anything routine. Words, faces, places. You walk into your own kitchen and for a second, it doesn't register as yours. You look at someone close to you and their face seems off, like you're seeing a stranger wearing familiar features. The automatic click of recognition doesn't fire. The sense of, I know this, fails to activate. The mechanism is desensitization through repetition. When you're exposed to something over and over in a short span, the neural response weakens. Your brain stops reinforcing the familiarity signal because it assumes the work is already done. It's trying to be efficient, conserving energy by not reconfirming what it thinks it knows. But push it too far and the signal degrades completely. The brain can't pull up the recognition fast enough. What should feel automatic suddenly requires conscious effort. You're left staring at something routine, grasping for a connection that won't form. Repeat a word 20 times and it starts dissolving into noise. Say your own name over and over, and it begins sounding like gibberish. That's jamais vu cutting in. Pattern recognition collapses under the weight of repetition, and the familiar becomes strange. It's temporary. Stop fixating and the pathways reset. But in the moment, it's deeply disorienting. Because the things your brain should recognize instantly, your handwriting, your street, the face you see every day, suddenly require you to figure them out all over again. The strangest part is knowing you know. You haven't forgotten. The information is still there. But the recognition system has shut down, leaving you trapped in a loop where certainty and confusion exist at the same time. Depersonalization. Your voice sounds wrong. Not sick. Not tired. Just distant, like it's coming from someone else standing behind you. You're speaking forming words, hearing them arrive in your ears. But the connection between intention and sound has gone slack. It's your voice. You know that. But it doesn't feel like yours anymore. This disconnection spreads fast. Your hands move across the keyboard, but they look unfamiliar, like props taped to someone else's body. You watch yourself walk down the hallway, and the movement feels scripted, mechanical. You're still there, still conscious. But you've become an observer watching your own life from a step removed. Depersonalization is the sensation of being detached from yourself. You're present, but not anchored. The automatic sense of ownership over your thoughts, actions, and body weakens until you're functioning on autopilot while watching it all happen from somewhere just outside. The brain triggers this as a protective response to overwhelming stress, trauma, or exhaustion. When emotional input exceeds what the system can handle, it shuts down the connection between experience and emotion. You're still processing information. You're still responding. But the emotional weight gets stripped out, leaving only the mechanics. It's a survival tool. By disconnecting from the intensity, the brain prevents overload. But the cost is high. You stop feeling like the person living your life. You become the person observing it. It shows up during panic attacks, after trauma, in chronic stress. Someone might describe feeling like they're watching themselves in a movie, or like they're piloting their body remotely. The sense of "this is me" dissolves into "this is happening to someone I'm watching." Gok. The disconnect can last minutes or stretch for hours. Some people experience it once and never again. Others get stuck in it, the detachment becoming baseline until they forget what normal connection felt like. And the cruelest part is how it isolates you even from yourself. You're not numb. You're aware. You're watching everything unfold. But the thread tying you to your own experience has been cut, and you're left wondering if you'll ever feel like yourself again. Derealization. Everything looks normal. The street is the same. The buildings haven't changed. People move the way they always do. But something fundamental has shifted. The world feels flattened, like you're looking at a high-definition photograph instead of the real thing. Colors seem muted or oversaturated. Sounds arrive slightly off, like they're being piped in through speakers. You're seeing reality, but it stopped feeling real. This is derealization, the sensation that the external world has become foreign, dreamlike, or artificial. It's not hallucination. You're not seeing things that aren't there. The problem is how your brain is processing what is there. The normal sense of presence and solidity drains out of everything around you. The mechanism mirrors depersonalization, but the target is different. Instead of disconnecting you from yourself, the brain disconnects you from the environment. It's still a stress response, a way of creating distance when the system is overwhelmed. By making the world feel less real, the brain reduces the emotional impact of whatever's happening in it. It often shows up alongside anxiety or panic. You're walking through a familiar neighborhood, and suddenly it feels like a stage set, too clean, too arranged. You're talking to someone and their face looks oddly flat, like a mask. The sense of depth and texture vanishes, leaving everything feeling hollow. For some it's fog. The world becomes hazy and distinct, like they're seeing it through a screen. For others it's hyperclarity. Everything sharpens into unnatural focus, so detailed it stops feeling organic. The disconnect makes functioning strange. You can still navigate. You still know where you are, but the automatic sense of being embedded in the world, of belonging to the space you're in, has shut down. You're moving through a place that feels like a simulation of itself. It fades when the stress lifts. But while it's happening, it compounds the disorientation. Because if the world itself stops feeling solid, how do you trust anything you're experiencing? Sleep paralysis. You wake up. Or at least, you think you do. Your eyes are open. You're aware of the room, the bed, the shadows on the ceiling. But you can't move. Your arms won't respond. Your legs are locked. You try to call out and nothing happens. Your body has become a cage, and you're trapped inside it, fully conscious but completely frozen. Then the terror sets in. Because you're not alone. There's a pressure on your chest. A weight pressing down, making it harder to breathe. You sense something in the room. A presence. A presence. A figure standing in the corner, or worse, leaning over you. You can't turn your head to look. You can't fight. You can't run. All you can do is lie there, paralyzed, while the panic builds. This is sleep paralysis, a state where your mind wakes up but your body stays locked in the paralysis of sleep. During REM sleep, the brain shuts down voluntary muscle movement to keep you from acting out dreams. Normally, this paralysis lifts the moment you wake. But sometimes the timing breaks. Consciousness returns while the body is still frozen. What makes it worse is that REM doesn't fully release its grip. You're awake, but fragments of the dream state bleed through. Hallucinations form. Shadows twist into figures. Sounds become footsteps or whispers. The sense of a presence of something malevolent nearby is nearly universal. It's your brain misfiring, blending waking perception with the surreal logic of dreams. The experience is brief, usually lasting under a minute. But terror stretches time. Those seconds feel endless. It's more common than most people realize. Stress, irregular sleep, sleeping on your back, all of these increase the likelihood. Some experience it once. Others deal with it regularly, dreading the moment they feel their body lock up. And the fear doesn't always come from the paralysis itself. It comes from the certainty, in that moment, that something is wrong. That this isn't normal. That you might be stuck like this. The rational explanation doesn't matter when you're in it. All that matters is the helplessness, and the presence you're convinced is there. Eventually, the paralysis breaks. Movement returns. The hallucinations dissolve. But the memory stays sharp because nothing quite matches the feeling of being awake and powerless inside your own body. Hypnagogic hallucination. You're drifting off. Not quite asleep, not fully awake. Your thoughts are starting to blur, logic loosening its grip. Then you hear your name. Clear, distinct. Someone just called you from across the room. You jerk awake, heart pounding, eyes scanning the dark. But the room is empty. No one's there. No one was ever there. Or you see it instead. A figure standing by the door. A flash of movement in the corner of your vision. A face appearing and vanishing before you can focus on it. You blink, fully awake now, and it's gone. But for that split second, it was real, solid, undeniable. These are hypnagogic hallucinations, sensory experiences that occur in the transition between wakefulness and sleep. Your brain is shutting down its wakeful processing and booting up the dream machinery, but the handoff isn't clean. For a moment, the two states overlap. Dream content leaks into waking perception, creating images, sounds, or sensations that feel completely real. The mechanism is simple but disorienting. As you fall asleep, different parts of the brain power down at different rates. The sensory cortex might still be active while the logical centers have already dimmed. So when dream fragments start forming, there's no filter questioning whether they're real. They just appear vivid and immediate, because the part of you that would normally recognize them as imaginary is already offline. Sound is the most common. Voices calling your name, footsteps, knocking music. Touch comes next. The feeling of someone sitting on the bed, a hand on your shoulder, the sensation of falling. Visuals are rarer but more jarring. Shapes. Faces. Entire figures standing in the room. It's harmless. Just a timing glitch in the sleep-wake transition. But it doesn't feel harmless in the moment. Because the hallucination carries the full weight of reality. Your brain isn't tagging it as imaginary. It's processing it as present, as happening right now. The opposite can happen when you wake up. Hypnopompic hallucinations occur in the transition from sleep to wakefulness. Same mechanism, different direction. You open your eyes and the dream is still there, lingering for a few seconds before dissolving. Most people experience it at some point. Exhaustion makes it more frequent. So does stress. Your brain is juggling too much and the boundaries between states start breaking down. The hallucination fades as soon as you're fully awake. But the jolt stays with you. Because for that brief moment, your mind presented something impossible as fact, and you had no choice but to believe it. Dissociation. The world doesn't disappear. You don't black out. You're still there, still moving through your day, still responding when people talk to you. But you've stopped being present for any of it. Everything feels remote, like you're watching your life happen to someone else from behind thick glass. This isn't spacing out. It's not daydreaming. It's dissociation, a mental disconnect so complete that you lose the thread tying you to your own experience. Time becomes elastic. Hours collapse into minutes or stretch into something endless. Details blur together. You might complete entire conversations without retaining a single word. You might drive home and have no memory of the route you took. The brain does this when reality becomes too much to process directly. Trauma, extreme stress, overwhelming emotion. When the system can't handle the input, it creates distance by shutting down the connection between you and what's happening. You're still experiencing events. You're still functioning. But the emotional and cognitive processing has been severed, leaving you operating on autopilot. It's a protective mechanism. By disconnecting, the brain prevents overload. But the cost is steep. You lose chunks of time. You lose the sense of continuity that makes life feel coherent. You become a passenger in your own existence. Some people experience it during a single traumatic event, and never again. Others slip into it regularly, the disconnect becoming their baseline whenever stress levels rise. They describe it as feeling unreal, or like they're floating outside themselves, or like they're watching their life on a screen. The disconnect can be mild, a sense of detachment that fades after a few minutes. Or it can be severe, entire days lost to a fog where nothing quite registers. The brain has decided that full engagement is too dangerous, so it pulls back, leaving you stranded somewhere between presence and absence. And the isolation is profound, because you're not numb, you're aware. You know something is wrong. But the mechanism that would normally anchor you to the moment has been switched off, and you're left drifting with no way to pull yourself back. Autoscopy. You're standing in your kitchen. The light is normal. The room is familiar. Then you see yourself. Not in a mirror. Not in a reflection. You, standing across the room. Looking back at you, the figure is exact. Same clothes. Same posture. Same face. It's not translucent. It's not ghostly. It's solid physical, undeniably there. And it's you. This is autoscopy, a hallucination where you perceive your own body from an external viewpoint. The brain generates a duplicate of you and places it in your visual field as if it's a separate entity occupying the same space. You're seeing yourself as others would see you, but from the wrong side of your own eyes. The mechanism involves a breakdown in how the brain integrates sensory information about body position and spatial awareness. Normally, your sense of where you are is constructed from vision, balance, and proprioception, the internal awareness of your body's position. These inputs sync up to create a unified sense of self located inside your body. But if the integration fails, the brain can generate a second representation of you. It projects this image outward, placing it in the environment as if it were a real object. You're still in your body. You're still looking out from your own perspective. But now there's a duplicate standing in front of you, and your brain insists it's real. The experience is brief, usually lasting seconds to a few minutes. Cox. It can happen during migraines, seizures, or extreme exhaustion. The neurological wiring misfires, and suddenly you're confronted with an impossible sight, yourself, externalized, staring back. Some describe it as uncanny but emotionally neutral. Others report profound terror, because the figure isn't doing what you're doing. It's not mirroring your movements. It's standing independently, and that independence makes it feel like something separate, something other, even though you know it's you. The hallucination dissolves as quickly as it forms. The duplicate fades. The integration reestablishes. But the memory of seeing yourself as an object in space, detached from your own perspective, doesn't leave easily. Because nothing prepares you for the moment your brain decides you exist in two places at once. Out-of-body experience. You're lying in bed fully awake and suddenly you're not. Or rather you are, but you're also somewhere else. You're floating near the ceiling, looking down at yourself. Your body is still there, still breathing, still occupying the bed. But you're up here detached, observing from above. This is an out-of-body experience, the sensation of being separated from your physical form and perceiving the world from a location outside it. It's not a dream. You're conscious. You can see the room, the furniture, your own body lying below. But the perspective has shifted. You're no longer anchored inside yourself. The brain constructs this experience by disrupting the normal integration of sensory and spatial information. Your sense of self is built from inputs telling you where your body is and what it's experiencing. When those signals conflict or degrade, the brain can relocate your sense of presence to a point outside your physical location. It happens during sleep paralysis, extreme stress, near-death situations, or certain neurological conditions. The systems responsible for body ownership and spatial orientation misfire, and suddenly your subjective viewpoint detakes. You're still receiving information. You're still aware. But the source of that awareness has been moved. People describe floating, drifting, or hovering. Some report traveling through walls or across distances. The sense of detachment can feel liberating or deeply unsettling, depending on the context. What's consistent is the vividness. This doesn't feel imaginary. It feels like a shift in where you're located. The neuroscience suggests it's not mysterious. The brain is guessing where you are based on incomplete or conflicting data, and sometimes it guesses wrong. The result is a perceptual error so convincing that your entire sense of self relocates outside your body. When it ends, the perspective snaps back. You're inside yourself again, grounded in the physical. But the experience leaves a residue. Because for those moments, you were genuinely convinced you'd left your body behind, and the boundary between here and there stopped making sense. Capgras Delusion. Your mother walks into the room, same face, same voice, same mannerisms, but she's not your mother. You know this with absolute certainty. This is an imposter, a replacement, someone who looks exactly like her but isn't her. You can't explain how you know. There's no evidence. She acts like your mother. She knows things only your mother would know. But the conviction is unshackable. The person in front of you is a stranger wearing your mother's face. This is Capgras Delusion, a condition where you become convinced that someone close to you has been replaced by an identical imposter. It's not suspicion. It's not paranoia in the usual sense. It's a complete loss of emotional recognition despite intact visual recognition. The mechanism involves a disconnect between two brain pathways. One pathway handles facial recognition, identifying who someone is based on their features. The other handles emotional recognition, the automatic feeling of familiarity and connection that comes with seeing someone you know. Normally, these pathways work together. You see your mother, recognize her face, and feel the warmth of familiarity. The recognition is both cognitive and emotional. But in Capgras Delusion, the emotional pathway is damaged or disconnected. You still recognize the face. You know intellectually that this person looks like your mother. But the feeling of familiarity is gone, and because the brain expects that feeling to accompany recognition, its absence creates a mismatch. The brain resolves this mismatch with a disturbing explanation. This must be an imposter. It's most common after brain injury, stroke, or in dementia. The person affected isn't losing their mind in a general sense. They're experiencing a very specific error, visual recognition without emotional confirmation. The delusion is distressing for everyone involved. The person with Capgras knows something is wrong, but can't override the conviction. Family members find themselves accused of being fake, no matter how much evidence they provide. The bond of recognition, something so automatic it's invisible, has been severed, leaving only the shell of familiarity. And logic doesn't help, because the problem isn't rational, it's perceptual. The brain is processing the face correctly but rejecting it emotionally, and that rejection overrides everything else. Fregoli Delusion. The barista at the coffee shop is the same person as your neighbor. The stranger on the bus is the same person as your coworker. They don't look the same. Their faces are different. Their voices are different. But you know they're the same person in disguise. This is Fregoli Delusion, the opposite of Capgras. Instead of believing someone close has been replaced, you become convinced that different people are actually a single individual who keeps changing their appearance to follow or observe you. The mechanism is similar to Capgras but reversed. The emotional recognition system is overactive. You feel a strong sense of familiarity when looking at strangers, even though their faces don't match anyone you know. The brain tries to reconcile this mismatch by concluding that the person must be someone you know who's deliberately altering their appearance. It creates a paranoid narrative. The barista isn't just a barista. They're your neighbor, tracking your movements. The person on the bus isn't a stranger. They're your coworker, monitoring you. The delusion builds a story to explain why the same person keeps appearing in different forms. It's rare, typically emerging after brain injury, psychiatric conditions, or neurological disease. The person experiencing it can recognize that the faces are objectively different, but the feeling of recognition is so strong it overrides the visual mismatch. The delusion feeds on itself. Every new encounter with a stranger becomes evidence of the pattern. The more people you meet, the more convinced you become that they're all the same person. The sense of being watched or followed intensifies because the disguises seem to be everywhere. Unlike Capgras, where the loss of familiarity creates distance, Fregoli creates unwanted connection. Strangers aren't strangers. They're intrusions of a familiar presence into spaces where they shouldn't be. And no amount of logical reasoning can dissolve the feeling, because the problem isn't in the logic. It's in the recognition system itself, firing familiarity signals where none should exist. Cryptomnesia. You write a melody. It feels original. You're proud of it. Then someone points out you've copied a song that came out 2 years ago. But you didn't copy it. You don't remember hearing that song. As far as you're concerned, the melody came from you. This is cryptomnesia, a memory error where you experience someone else's idea as your own original creation. You're not lying. You're not plagiarizing intentionally. Your brain has genuinely forgotten the source and repackaged the memory as something you generated. The mechanism involves a failure in source monitoring. When you store a memory, your brain is supposed to tag it with context, where it came from when you encountered it, whether you created it or absorbed it. But sometimes those tags degrade or never form properly. The content remains, but the origin gets stripped away. Later, when the idea resurfaces, it feels new. Because the tag saying, "this came from outside," is missing, your brain defaults to assuming it's yours. You retrieve the melody, the phrase, the concept, and experience it as original thought. It's more common than most people realize. Writers accidentally reproduce passages they read years ago. Musicians independently compose riffs they heard once and forgot. Researchers propose ideas they absorbed from a colleague's offhand comment but no longer remember hearing. The danger is that it's invisible to you. There's no internal signal saying, "this isn't yours." The memory feels authentic. And because memory is unreliable and creativity involves recombining existing elements, the line between inspiration and cryptomnesia is often impossible to locate. It's not the same as deliberate theft. The person experiencing cryptomnesia genuinely believes they've created something new. They're surprised, sometimes devastated, when the source is revealed, because they weren't trying to deceive anyone. Their brain deceived them first, erasing the origin and leaving only the content. And once you understand cryptomnesia, it becomes harder to trust your own originality. Because if your brain can silently recycle someone else's work and present it as yours, how do you ever know for certain where an idea actually came from? False awakening. You open your eyes. The alarm went off. Time to get ready. You swing your legs out of bed, walk to the bathroom, turn on the shower. The water is warm. The routine is familiar. You're getting dressed, grabbing your keys, heading for the door. Then something feels off. A detail doesn't match. The door is the wrong color. Your phone is in the wrong place. And suddenly you're actually waking up. In bed. The alarm hasn't gone off yet. None of it happened. A false awakening is a dream of waking up. You experience the entire process of getting out of bed and starting your day, but you're still asleep. The dream replicates your normal routine so convincingly that you don't question it. You believe you're awake because everything feels exactly like being awake. The brain constructs this by running your waking routine as a simulation during sleep. The neural patterns that normally activate when you wake up fire while you're still in REM. Your mind generates the sensations, the environment, the sequence of actions. It pulls from memory to recreate your morning in vivid detail. What makes it convincing is how mundane it is. You're not flying. You're not in a strange location. You're doing exactly what you do every morning. The familiarity overrides suspicion. Why would you doubt that you're awake when everything matches your actual routine? Some people experience it once and move on. Others get caught in loops. They wake up, start their day, realize it's a dream, wake up again, start over. The cycle repeats, sometimes several times before they finally reach actual wakefulness. Each layer feels real until the next break shatters it. The disorientation comes later. You're not sure which awakening was genuine. You check the time, check your surroundings, looking for proof that this iteration is the real one. Because once your brain has fooled you this completely, trust in your own perception becomes fragile. Microsleep. You're driving, eyes open, hands on the wheel. Then you blink and you've moved forward several car lengths without any memory of it. You didn't close your eyes. You didn't nod off. But a few seconds just vanished. This is microsleep, a brief episode where your brain shuts down for a fraction of time while you're still technically awake. It lasts anywhere from a fraction of a second to several seconds. Your eyes might stay open. You might even remain upright. But consciousness drops out, leaving a gap in your awareness. The brain does this when it's starved for sleep. Exhaustion overrides wakefulness, and parts of the brain start cycling into sleep mode even while you're active. It's not a choice. It's the system overriding your attempt to stay alert because the need for rest has become critical. It happens most often during monotonous tasks. Driving on a straight highway. Sitting in a meeting. Staring at a screen. The lack of stimulation makes it easier for the brain to slip into shutdown mode. One moment you're present. The next you're not. Then you snap back, often without realizing you were ever gone. The danger is obvious when you're operating machinery or driving. Those few seconds of absence can cover significant distance or result in catastrophic error. But even in safer contexts, the experience is unsettling. Time skips forward. Continuity breaks. You lose track of what just happened, and the gap is impossible to reconstruct. You can't fight it through willpower. Microsleep is a neurological event, not a failure of discipline. The only solution is actual rest. But until you get it, your brain will keep forcing these brief shutdowns, carving holes in your awareness whether you notice them or not. Time distortion. 10 minutes feels like an hour, or an hour collapses into what seems like 10 minutes. You look at the clock expecting 5 minutes to have passed and it's been 40. Or you're convinced you've been waiting forever and barely any time has moved at all. Time distortion is the warping of subjective time, where your internal sense of duration stops matching the actual passage of time. It's not confusion. The distortion is perceptual. Your brain is processing time at a different rate than the clock. The mechanism involves how the brain tracks events. Normally, your sense of time is built from the density of information you're processing. More events, more mental activity, and time feels longer. Fewer events, less activity, and time compresses. But stress, fear, boredom, or intense focus can throw this system off balance. Fear stretches time. In a moment of danger, your brain shifts into overdrive, processing details at a higher rate. More information gets packed into each second, making the duration feel extended. People describe car accidents or falls as happening in slow motion. The event itself unfolds at normal speed, but the brain's heightened processing creates the illusion of stretched time. Boredom does the opposite in the moment but reverses in memory. Waiting feels endless because you're not processing much, so each second drags. But when you look back, the whole period feels short because so little happened. Conversely, an engaging experience flies by in the moment but feels substantial in memory because of how much you processed. Intense focus collapses time entirely. You're absorbed in a task, and hours vanish. Flow states shut down the part of your brain that tracks duration. You're fully engaged, and the monitoring system goes quiet. When you finally surface, the disconnect between how long it felt and how long it was can be jarring. The brain's clock is flexible. It adjusts based on context, input, and state. And once you realize how elastic your sense of time actually is, the idea of duration as something fixed starts feeling less certain. Presence hallucination. You're alone in your apartment. You know you're alone, but you feel someone behind you. Not a vague sense. A specific, undeniable awareness that someone is standing just out of view, watching. You turn around. Nothing. But the feeling doesn't leave. The presence stays, hovering at the edge of your perception. This is a presence hallucination, the sensation of another person or entity nearby when no one is there. It's not visual. You're not seeing anything. It's a felt certainty, a sensory conviction that bypasses sight and lodges itself directly in awareness. The brain generates this by misfiring its system for detecting nearby agents. Humans are wired to sense when others are close. It's a survival mechanism, part of social and threat awareness. But sometimes the system activates without input. The brain signals that someone is present, and because the signal feels real, you believe it. It happens during sleep paralysis, extreme fatigue, isolation, or certain neurological conditions. The feeling can be neutral, just a sense of someone there. Or it can carry emotional weight. The presence feels malevolent, oppressive, invasive. You're alone, but your brain insists otherwise. Some describe it as a shadow figure. Others feel it as a pressure, a shift in the room's atmosphere. The specifics vary, but the core sensation is the same. You are not alone, even though you are. The experience is brief for some, persistent for others. It can fade when you move or turn on a light. Or it can linger, the feeling trailing you from room to room until exhaustion lifts or sleep resets the system. Knowing it's a hallucination doesn't always dissolve it. The feeling operates below conscious reasoning. Your rational mind can recognize the error, but the presence remains solid and insistent, because the part of your brain generating it isn't listening to logic. Pareidolia. You see a face in the clouds, in the wood grain on your desk, in the front of a car. The arrangement is random, but your brain locks onto it as something recognizable.
Eyes,
nose, mouth. a face looking back at you from a surface that shouldn't have one. Pareidolia is the tendency to perceive familiar patterns, especially faces, in random or ambiguous stimuli. It's not imagination. You're genuinely seeing the pattern. Your brain is organizing the visual noise into something meaningful, even though the meaning isn't actually there. The mechanism is pattern recognition working overtime. Humans are wired to detect faces quickly. It's a survival trait, recognizing friend or threat at a glance. The system is so sensitive that it fires on minimal input. 2 dots and a line can trigger it, a shadow and a curve. Anything remotely face-like gets flagged as a potential face. This creates false positives. You see faces in electrical outlets, in the texture of toast, in rock formations. The brain isn't malfunctioning. It's doing exactly what it's designed to do, prioritizing detection over accuracy. Better to see a face that isn't there than miss one that is. It's not limited to faces. You can perceive animals in cloud shapes, figures in static, voices in white noise. The brain searches for structure, and when it finds something that vaguely matches a stored pattern, it completes the image. Pareidolia is universal. Everyone experiences it. The difference is in how you interpret what you're seeing. Some recognize it as a quirk of perception and move on. Others assign meaning to the pattern, seeing intention or message in the randomness. The phenomenon is harmless, but it highlights how much of perception is construction. You're not passively receiving images. Your brain is actively interpreting, filling in gaps, and imposing order. And sometimes it imposes order where none exists. Apophenia. The same number keeps appearing. On receipts, license plates, clocks. You see it everywhere. It feels too frequent to be coincidence. There must be a reason. A pattern. A message. Apophenia is the perception of meaningful connections in unrelated or random data. Your brain detects a pattern and assigns significance to it, even when the pattern is coincidental. It's not delusion. You're genuinely noticing the recurrence. The error is in the meaning you attach to it. The brain is built to find patterns. That's how you learn, predict, and navigate the world. You notice correlations, spot regularities, and use them to make sense of your environment. But the pattern detection system doesn't have a built-in filter for randomness. It flags patterns regardless of whether they're meaningful or accidental. This creates false connections. You notice every time the number appears and forget all the times it doesn't. The selective attention makes the pattern seem more frequent than it is. Your brain reinforces the connection each time you spot it, building a sense of significance around what's actually just noise. It shows up in gambling. Players see streaks and trends in outcomes that are purely random. They adjust their bets on perceived patterns that don't predict anything. The brain insists the pattern is real because it keeps appearing, but the appearance is a product of selective focus, not underlying structure. In extreme cases, apophenia can fuel paranoia or conspiracy thinking. Unrelated events get threaded together into a narrative. Coincidences become evidence. The brain builds a story to explain the connections, and the story feels true because the pattern feels undeniable. The challenge is that some patterns are real. Genuine correlations exist, so the brain can't just ignore all patterns. It has to guess which ones matter. And sometimes it guesses wrong, seeing structure in randomness and meaning in coincidence. Recognizing apophenia doesn't stop it. You'll still notice the number. You'll still feel the pull of the pattern. But understanding the mechanism lets you question the significance instead of assuming it's there. Alien hand syndrome. Your hand reaches out and grabs something. You didn't tell it to. You weren't planning to move. But the hand acts anyway, picking up an object, unbuttoning your shirt, reaching towards someone's face. You watch it happen. You feel the movement. But the intention isn't yours. You try to stop it. Your other hand grabs the rogue one, pulls it back, forces it down. But the moment you let go, it moves again. Independent. autonomous, operating under a will that isn't connected to your own. Alley hand syndrome is exactly what it sounds like. One hand behaves as if it belongs to someone else. It moves, grasps, interferes, sometimes working directly against what you're trying to do. You button your shirt with one hand while the other unbuttons it. You reach for a glass with your right hand while your left knocks it over. The syndrome typically emerges after brain injury or surgery, particularly damage to the corpus callosum, the structure connecting the brain's two hemispheres. When that connection is severed or disrupted, the hemispheres can operate independently. One side of the brain controls one hand, and if the communication between sides breaks down, that hand starts acting on its own. The hand isn't paralyzed. It's not limp or unresponsive. It's active, purposeful, executing actions. The problem is that those actions aren't integrated with your conscious intent. The motor control is intact, but the connection to voluntary decision-making has been cut. People describe it as disturbing in a way that goes beyond frustration. The hand feels like theirs. They can feel touch, pressure, movement. But the agency is gone. It's their body betraying their will, moment by moment, in ways they can't predict or fully control. Some learn to manage it by keeping the hand occupied, holding something, tucking it into a pocket. Others restrain it physically, using the unaffected hand to pin it down. But the underlying problem doesn't resolve. The hand remains autonomous, a piece of your body that stopped taking orders. Thought insertion. A thought appears in your mind, but it doesn't feel like yours. You didn't generate it. You didn't choose it. It arrived from somewhere else, placed there by an external force. The content is in your head, but the origin is alien. This isn't distraction or an intrusive thought you're trying to ignore. It's the sensation that a thought has been inserted into your consciousness by someone or something outside yourself. You experience it as an invasion, an idea that doesn't belong. Thought insertion is a symptom most commonly associated with schizophrenia and certain psychotic disorders. It represents a breakdown in the sense of mental ownership. Normally, you recognize your thoughts as self-generated. Even unwanted or intrusive thoughts are tagged as coming from you. But in thought insertion, that tagging system fails. The thought is there, but the sense of authorship is missing. The brain attributes the thought to an external source because it lacks the internal signature of ownership. It feels imposed rather than produced. The content might be mundane or bizarre, but what defines the experience is the conviction that it originated outside your mind. This creates profound disorientation. Your internal mental space, the one place that should be entirely your own, has been braked. You can't trust that what you're thinking is actually yours. The boundary between self and other, normally so clear in the realm of thought, has dissolved. People experiencing this may believe the thoughts are being transmitted by another person, an organization, or some unseen force. The lack of internal ownership demands an external explanation, and the brain fills the gap with whatever narrative makes the intrusion comprehensible. Treatment typically involves antipsychotic medication, which can reduce the symptom by stabilizing the neurological processes underlying thought generation and attribution. But the experience itself is difficult to describe to someone who hasn't felt it. Because for most people, the idea that a thought could feel like it doesn't belong to you is almost incomprehensible. Until it happens. Thought broadcasting. You're sitting in a quiet room. No one is speaking. But you're certain everyone around you can hear your thoughts. Not metaphorically. Literally. Your internal monologue, the stream of thinking that's supposed to be private, is being broadcast outward. They know what you're thinking. They're hearing it as clearly as if you were speaking aloud. You don't want them to know. You try to stop thinking to quiet your mind. But that's impossible. Thoughts keep coming, and with each one, you're convinced it's being transmitted, exposed, made public without your consent. Thought broadcasting is the delusion that your thoughts are escaping your mind, and becoming accessible to others. It's not paranoia about people guessing what you're thinking based on your behavior. It's the certainty that your thoughts themselves are audible or perceptible. Like thought insertion, it's most commonly seen in schizophrenia and psychotic disorders. It stems from a disruption in the boundary between internal and external experience. The brain loses the ability to distinguish between private mental content and public communication. What should be contained within your own mind feels as though it's leaking out. The result is a loss of mental privacy, so complete it becomes unbearable. You can't hide. You can't retreat into your own thoughts for safety because your thoughts are no longer contained. Every fear, every impulse, every passing idea feels exposed. People experiencing thought broadcasting may withdraw, avoid others, or try to suppress their thinking entirely. Some develop elaborate strategies to block the transmission. Others become convinced that specific individuals or groups are deliberately tuning in. The delusion is resistant to logical contradiction. You can be told that no one can hear your thoughts, that it's not physically possible. But the subjective experience overrides the reasoning. It feels real, immediate, undeniable, and that feeling is enough to sustain the belief. Treatment focuses on medication to reduce psychotic symptoms and therapy to help rebuild the distinction between internal experience and external reality. But the memory of that violation, of having your mind feel like it's no longer your own private space, can linger long after the symptom resolves. Derealization panic. The world goes flat. You're walking down a familiar street, but it doesn't feel real anymore. The colors are wrong. The depth is gone. Everything looks like a stage set, artificial, two-dimensional. You know where you are. You recognize the buildings, but the sense of reality has drained out of everything around you. Then the panic hits. Your heart races. Your breathing tightens. The unreality intensifies, and now you're trapped in a loop. The panic makes the world feel less real, and the unreality fuels the panic. You're spiraling, caught between a reality that doesn't feel solid and a body that's screaming danger. This is derealization panic, the combination of derealization, the sensation that the external world is unreal, and a panic attack. They feed each other. The derealization triggers fear because the world has stopped feeling stable. The fear triggers physiological responses that worsen the derealization. The cycle amplifies until you're in full crisis, convinced something is fundamentally wrong. Derealization on its own is disorienting but manageable. Panic on its own is terrifying but time-limited. Together, they create a state where both the internal and external feel like they're collapsing. You can't ground yourself in the world because it doesn't feel real. You can't ground yourself in your body because it's flooded with panic. The experience can last minutes or stretch into hours. Some people describe it as feeling like they're dying, losing their mind, or detaching from reality permanently. The intensity makes it hard to remember that it will pass. In the moment, it feels infinite. What makes it worse is the fear of recurrence. Once you've experienced derealization panic, the memory creates anticipatory anxiety. You start watching for signs that it's coming back. And that vigilance can trigger the very state you're trying to avoid. Treatment often involves therapy to break the panic cycle and teach grounding techniques. Medication can reduce the frequency of panic attacks. But recovery also requires learning to tolerate the sensation of derealization without immediately interpreting it as catastrophic. Because the derealization itself isn't dangerous. It's the panic response that turns it into a crisis. Tactile hallucination. You feel something crawling on your arm. You look down. Nothing there. You brush your hand across your skin to be sure. Still nothing. But the sensation doesn't stop. It keeps moving, a clear, distinct feeling of something small and alive making its way across your body. Or you feel a hand on your shoulder. You turn around. No one's behind you. The room is empty. But the pressure was real. You felt fingers, weight, contact. Your brain processed it as touch, but there was nothing to touch you. Tactile hallucinations are sensations of physical contact or presence on the skin when no external stimulus exists. Unlike visual or auditory hallucinations, which you can sometimes dismiss as just seeing things or just hearing things, tactile hallucinations involve your body. They feel physical, immediate, undeniable. The brain generates these sensations by misfiring the somatosensory system, the network responsible for processing touch. Normally, this system activates in response to actual contact: pressure, temperature, texture. But in a tactile hallucination, it activates spontaneously, creating the sensation of touch without any input. The experience is common in certain medical and psychiatric conditions. Parkinson's disease, schizophrenia, drug withdrawal, and extreme sleep deprivation can all trigger tactile hallucinations. The sensation can be anything: insects crawling, water dripping, hands grabbing, textures brushing against skin. What makes it particularly distressing is that you can't easily prove it's not real. With a visual hallucination, you might look again and see it's gone. With an auditory hallucination, you might ask if anyone else heard it. But with touch, the sensation is located on your own body. It's private, internal, impossible to verify externally. People experiencing persistent tactile hallucinations may scratch, brush, or wash compulsively, trying to remove whatever they're feeling. Some avoid certain locations or situations where the sensations are more frequent. The hallucination doesn't just distort perception. It distorts behavior because the sensation demands a response even when there's nothing to respond to. Treatment depends on the underlying cause. Addressing the medical or psychiatric condition often reduces the hallucinations. But even after they stop, the memory of feeling something that wasn't there can make you second-guess every sensation, wondering if it's real or if your brain is lying again. Auditory hallucination. You hear your name. Clear. Distinct. Someone just called you from the next room. You get up, check. No one's there. You're alone, but you heard it. Not imagined it. Heard it. The voice was real. Or you hear music playing faintly, just at the edge of hearing. You follow the sound, trying to locate the source. It seems to be coming from outside, or maybe through a vent, or from a neighbor's apartment. But when you focus on it, the sound doesn't match any physical location. It's just there, persistent, with no origin. Auditory hallucinations are sounds perceived without an external source. They range from simple tones and music to complex voices speaking full sentences. The brain generates the auditory experience internally, but it feels as though it's coming from outside. The mechanism involves spontaneous activation of the auditory cortex. Normally, this region processes actual sound waves entering the ear. But it can also fire without input, creating the perception of sound where none exists. The brain hears something because the hearing system is active, not because there's anything to hear. Auditory hallucinations occur across a range of conditions. Schizophrenia is the most well-known, where voices may comment, command, or converse. But they also appear in Parkinson's disease, dementia, severe depression, and even in people with hearing loss, where the brain fills the silence with phantom sounds. The content varies widely. Some people hear neutral sounds, a phone ringing, footsteps, background chatter. Others hear voices that feel directed at them, sometimes hostile, sometimes neutral, sometimes familiar. The tone and content shape how distressing the experience becomes. For many, the hardest part is the isolation. You hear something that no one else can verify. You can describe it, but you can't prove it. And if the hallucinations are frequent or disturbing, the lack of external validation makes it harder to maintain a stable sense of reality. Treatment includes antipsychotic medication, which can reduce or eliminate the hallucinations by dampening overactive neural circuits. Therapy can help people learn to cope with persistent voices, reducing their emotional impact even when the voices themselves don't fully disappear. But the experience leaves a mark, because once you've heard something that wasn't there, the line between perception and reality becomes less certain. And you're left wondering, every time you hear something unexpected, whether it's real or whether your brain has started generating sound again. Visual hallucination. There's a person standing in the corner. You see them clearly. Clothes, posture, the way they're looking at you. But when you focus, really look, they flicker. Or they don't. They stay solid, present, until you blink and they're gone. Or it's not a person. It's patterns crawling across the wall, shapes shifting at the edge of your vision, colors that shouldn't be there bleeding into the room. You're seeing things that aren't there. Not imagining them. Seeing them. Your visual cortex is generating images and feeding them into your perception as if they're real. Visual hallucinations are false perceptions in the visual field. The brain creates images without external input and projects them into your awareness with the same clarity as actual sight. The content varies wildly. Faces, animals, geometric patterns, full scenes playing out like a film. They can emerge from neurological conditions like Parkinson's or dementia, where degenerating brain structures misfire. They appear during migraines in the aura phase before the pain hits. Sleep deprivation pushes the brain into states where dream imagery leaks into waking perception. Certain medications and substances can trigger them as a side effect. What's striking is the vividness. These aren't vague impressions. They're detailed, sometimes more detailed than actual objects in the room. The brain is using the same visual processing pathways it uses for real sight, so the hallucination feels indistinguishable from reality. Some people recognize the hallucination for what it is. They see the figure but know intellectually that it's not real. Others lose that distinction entirely, reacting to the hallucination as if it's a genuine presence. The difference depends on whether the brain retains its reality-checking function while the hallucination is active. The experience can be neutral, strange but not distressing, or it can be terrifying, especially when the content is threatening. A hallucinated face staring at you. Shadows moving toward you. The sense that something is in the room when you know you're alone. And even when they're recognized as false, the clarity is unsettling. Because your eyes are working fine. The problem is deeper. Your brain is showing you things that don't exist, and you can't turn it off. Sleepwalking. You wake up standing in the kitchen. You don't remember getting out of bed. You don't remember walking. The last thing you recall is lying down, closing your eyes. Now you're here, fully vertical, holding a glass, staring at the counter like you're in the middle of something. Or, you don't wake up in the kitchen. You wake up the next morning with no memory of getting up at all. But someone tells you they found you wandering the hallway, or that you tried to leave the house, or that you were rearranging furniture in the living room. You were moving, acting, responding, but you were asleep. Sleepwalking is exactly what it sounds like, walking and performing activities while in a state of sleep. Your body is active, your eyes may be open, you can navigate around objects. But consciousness is offline. You're not awake. You're not dreaming in the usual sense. You're in a hybrid state where motor control is functioning but awareness is absent. It happens during deep non-REM sleep, usually in the first few hours after falling asleep. The brain partially wakes the motor systems while leaving the conscious mind asleep. So you can move, walk, even complete simple tasks, but you're not forming memories of any of it. Most episodes are brief and harmless. You get up, wander a bit, then return to bed without ever fully waking. But some people cook, unlock doors, walk outside, or engage in complex behaviors that become dangerous when done without awareness. The person sleepwalking appears awake. Their eyes are open. They move with purpose. But if you try to talk to them, the responses are often incoherent or absent. They're not processing language normally. They're operating on autopilot, guided by whatever fragmented neural activity is driving the movement. Waking a sleepwalker isn't dangerous, but it's disorienting for them. They go from performing an action they don't remember starting to suddenly being awake in a place they don't remember reaching. The gap is jarring. And the lack of memory makes it worse. You can't reconstruct what happened. People tell you what you did, and you have to accept their account because your own mind has no record. You were there, but you weren't present. Confusional arousal. You hear the alarm. You open your eyes. You're awake. Or you think you are. But when someone asks you a question, your answer makes no sense. You're talking, but the words are scrambled, disconnected. You're trying to get out of bed, but your movements are clumsy, aimless. You're stuck in a state that's neither fully asleep nor fully awake. This is confusional arousal, a disorder where the brain gets trapped in the transition between sleep and wakefulness. Part of you has woken up. Your eyes are open, you're moving, you're making sounds. But the cognitive systems that handle coherent thought, memory, and orientation are still offline. It happens most often when waking from deep sleep. Someone shakes you awake suddenly, or an alarm pulls you out before your brain is ready. Instead of smoothly transitioning to wakefulness, the systems come online out of sync. Motor control activates. Basic perception activates, but reasoning, language, and spatial awareness lag behind. The result is confusion so profound you can't process where you are or what's happening. You might try to answer the door when there's no door. You might ask questions that don't make sense. You might become agitated or panicked without understanding why. People experiencing confusional arousal can appear drunk or delirious. Their behavior is erratic. They don't recognize familiar people or places. Time loses coherence. They might believe it's a different day or year. The confusion can last minutes or stretch longer, depending on how long it takes for full wakefulness to establish. It's more common in children but can happen to adults, especially under conditions of sleep deprivation or disrupted sleep schedules. The brain needs time to fully boot up, and if that process is interrupted, the half-awake state persists. And once it resolves, the memory is usually fragmented or absent. You might remember pieces, a sense of confusion, a blur of movement, but the details are gone. You were awake enough to act, but not awake enough to record what you were doing. Night terror. You're not dreaming. You're not aware. You're asleep, deeply asleep, and then suddenly you're screaming. Not waking up and then screaming. Screaming while still unconscious, sitting upright, eyes wide open, heart racing, sweat pouring. You look awake. You look terrified, but you're not there. If someone tries to calm you, you don't respond. You might push them away. You might try to run. Your body is in full panic mode, breathing fast, pupils dilated, muscles tensed for escape. But there's no conscious thought driving it. You're locked in a terror state with no awareness of what's happening. This is a night terror, a sudden episode of extreme fear during deep sleep. Unlike a nightmare, which happens during REM and can be remembered, a night terror occurs in non-REM sleep and leaves almost no memory. You're not experiencing a scary dream. Your brain has activated a fear response without any narrative, any context, any conscious experience take to it. The mechanism involves a misfire in the limbic system, the part of the brain that handles emotion and threat response. During deep sleep, this system can activate spontaneously, flooding the body with fear signals. The body reacts, screaming, thrashing, trying to escape. But the conscious mind never wakes up to understand why. Night terrors are most common in children but can persist or appear in adulthood. They usually happen in the first few hours of sleep, during the deepest phase. The episode can last seconds or several minutes. To an observer, it looks like a person trapped in a waking nightmare. But the person experiencing it isn't experiencing anything. The fear is physiological, not psychological. After it ends, the person typically calms down and returns to sleep with no memory of the event. If they wake up during or immediately after, they might feel residual fear or confusion, but they can't explain what caused it. There's no dream to recall, just a sense that something terrible happened without any idea what it was. And for the people witnessing it, the episode is disturbing. The terror looks real, overwhelming, unbearable. But there's nothing to do. You can't wake them out of it. You can't reassure them. You just have to wait for the brain to reset and the fear to subside on its own. Exploding head syndrome. You're drifting off, almost asleep. Then it hits a massive bang so loud it feels like it's inside your skull. Or a crash, a gunshot, a cymbal smashing inches from your ear. Your eyes snap open. Your heart is pounding. You're bracing for whatever just exploded. But the room is silent. Nothing happened. No sound. No explosion. Nothing. Exploding head syndrome is the perception of a loud noise or explosion at the moment of falling asleep or waking up. The sound isn't real. It's generated internally, a misfire in the brain's auditory system. But it feels real. Deafeningly real. The mechanism isn't fully understood, but it's believed to involve a glitch in the neural shutdown process during sleep onset. Normally, as you fall asleep, the brain's sensory systems power down gradually. But sometimes a cluster of neurons in the auditory cortex fires all at once instead of fading smoothly. That burst of activity registers as sound, loud, sudden, startling. The sound varies. Some people hear explosions or crashes. Others hear a loud bang, a door slamming, a gunshot, static bursting at maximum volume. A few report seeing a flash of light alongside the sound. The intensity is what makes it frightening. It's not a faint noise. It's overwhelming. There's no pain. Despite the name, nothing actually explodes. The sensation is purely auditory, or in some cases auditory visual. But the jolt is enough to snap you fully awake, heart racing, convinced something catastrophic just happened. It's harmless. Just a timing error in the brain's transition to sleep. It happens more frequently under stress or irregular sleep schedules. Some people experience it once and never again. Others deal with it regularly, the sudden phantom blast interrupting the edge of sleep over and over. And because it feels so real, it's hard not to react. You check the room. You listen for follow-up sounds. You try to make sense of what could have caused it. But there's nothing to find. The explosion existed only in your brain, a sensory ghost that vanished the moment it appeared. Synesthesia. You hear a sound and you see a color. Not imagining a color or associating one with the sound. Seeing it. The note plays and blue appears in your visual field. Or you read the letter A and it's red. Not because you painted it red or someone told you it should be red. It just is. The letter and the color are fused in your perception. Synesthesia is a cross-wiring of the senses, where stimulation of one sensory pathway automatically triggers another. Most people hear sounds and see colors separately. In synesthesia, the pathways are linked. Input to one sense activates both. The most common form is grapheme color synesthesia, where letters or numbers trigger specific color perceptions. The letter A might always appear red. The number 7 might always look green. The associations are consistent, automatic, and involuntary. You don't choose the color. It appears. Other forms include sound to color, where music or voices produce visual colors, or taste to touch, where certain flavors create tactile sensations. The variations are extensive, but the core mechanism is the same. Sensory signals that should stay separate get blended. It's not a disorder. It's a variation in neural wiring, present from birth or early development. The pathways between sensory regions are more interconnected than usual, so activation in one area spills over into another. The result is a richer, more layered perceptual experience. A word isn't just a word, it's a word and a color. A sound isn't just a sound, it's a sound and a shape. For people with synesthesia, the cross-sensory perception is normal. They often don't realize others don't experience it until someone points out the disconnect. They assumed everyone saw letters in color or tasted shapes, because that's how their brain has always worked. The experience isn't distracting or overwhelming. It's integrated. The color doesn't obscure the letter. The shape doesn't drown out the taste. They coexist, enhancing perception rather than interfering with it. And once you understand synesthesia, it raises a question how much of perception is actually shared. If one person's A is always red and another's is always blue, and both are certain which one is real, the answer is both, or neither. Because perception isn't about accuracy. It's about what your brain constructs from the raw signals, and sometimes those constructions blend in ways most people never experience. Tip of the tongue phenomenon. The word is right there. You can feel it hovering just out of reach. You know what you want to say. You know the meaning, the context, even what the word sounds like. Maybe starts with a T, maybe 2 syllables. But the actual word won't come. You grasp for it, cycling through similar words, hoping one will trigger the connection. Nothing lands. The word stays locked just beyond retrieval. This is the tip of the tongue phenomenon, a retrieval failure where you know something but can't access it. It's not forgetting. The information is stored. You can describe what you're looking for. You can rule out wrong answers. But the direct pathway to the word has been temporarily blocked. The brain stores words in networks of meaning, sound, and association. Normally, when you need a word, activation spreads through these networks until the right one surfaces. But sometimes the activation gets stuck. You retrieve partial information. The first letter, the number of syllables, similar sounding words, but the full word remains inaccessible. What's frustrating is how close it feels. You're certain the word exists. You might even remember using it recently. The feeling of knowing is strong, but the knowing itself won't materialize. You're caught between certainty and absence. It happens more frequently with proper names, less common words, or when you're tired or distracted. Age increases the frequency. The retrieval system slows down, and the gaps between knowing and accessing widen. Sometimes the word appears suddenly, minutes or hours later, when you've stopped actively searching. The blockage clears on its own, and the word surfaces effortlessly. Other times, someone else says it, and instant recognition floods in. You knew it. You just couldn't get to it. And the experience highlights a strange feature of memory. You can know that you know without being able to prove it. The feeling of familiarity, the sense that information is present, operates separately from the ability to retrieve that information. The knowledge is there. The access just isn't. False memory. You remember it clearly. The conversation happened. They said those exact words. You were standing in the kitchen, late afternoon, the light coming in through the window. The memory is vivid, detailed, specific. Then someone tells you it never happened. You argue. You're certain, but they show you proof, a date mismatch, a location error, evidence that contradicts your recollection. And slowly, the certainty cracks. False memory is a recollection of something that didn't happen, or didn't happen the way you remember it. It's not lying. You genuinely believe the memory is real. Your brain has constructed it with the same detail and conviction as an actual memory, but the content is fabricated or distorted. Memory isn't a recording. It's a reconstruction. Every time you recall something, your brain rebuilds the memory from fragments. Sensory details, emotions, contextual cues. But the rebuilding process is vulnerable to errors. Suggestions from others, your own expectations, and information encountered after the event can all blend into the reconstruction, creating details that were never there. Experiments have demonstrated how easily false memories form. People can be convinced they were lost in a mall as a child, or that they performed an action they only imagined. The memories feel real because the brain uses the same mechanisms to construct them as it uses for genuine memories. What makes false memories dangerous is their indistinguishability from real ones. There's no internal marker saying, "This didn't happen." The detail, the emotional weight, the certainty, all of it mirrors authentic recollection. You can't tell the difference from the inside. This creates problems in contexts where memory is treated as evidence. Eyewitness testimony can be confidently wrong. Childhood recollections can be shaped by stories told later. Traumatic memories can incorporate details suggested during therapy. The memory feels true, and that feeling becomes the proof, even when the content is fabricated. And once a false memory is established, it's difficult to dislodge. Correcting it requires external evidence strong enough to override the subjective conviction. But even then, the emotional weight of the memory, the sense that it happened, can persist, leaving you torn between what you remember and what you're told is real. Misperception under stress. The situation is tense. Your heart is racing. Every sound feels amplified. You see movement in the corner of your vision and spin around, ready to react. But it's nothing. A shadow. A piece of fabric shifting in the breeze. Under stress, your brain doesn't just heighten awareness. It starts seeing threats that aren't there. Misperception under stress, the brain's tendency to distort sensory input when under pressure. The system shifts into hypervigilance, prioritizing speed over accuracy. It would rather flag a false threat than miss a real one. So ambiguous stimuli get interpreted as danger. Neutral faces look hostile. Sudden movements register as attacks. The threshold for threat detection drops, and false alarms multiply. The mechanism is survival-oriented. When the brain perceives danger, it activates the fight or flight response. Adrenaline floods the system. Attention narrows. Processing speed increases. But accuracy decreases. The brain is optimizing for fast response, not careful analysis. It's making quick guesses based on incomplete information, and those guesses skew toward danger. This shows up in high-pressure situations, confrontations, emergencies, moments of fear. Police officers misjudge objects as weapons. People in accidents recall details that didn't exist. Witnesses describe events that never occurred because their stressed brain filled gaps with assumptions shaped by fear. The distortion isn't limited to vision. Sounds get misheard. Touch gets misinterpreted. Time perception warps. Everything processes through a filter that's primed for threat, and that filter reshapes reality. The problem compounds because stress also impairs memory formation. So the distorted perception gets encoded as if it were accurate. You remember seeing a weapon because, in that moment, your brain genuinely perceived it as one. The misperception becomes the memory, and the memory reinforces the belief that the perception was real. And even after the stress fades, the distorted memory persists. You can be shown evidence that contradicts what you saw, but the conviction remains. Because your brain experienced it as real, and the emotional intensity of the moment locked it in as truth. Body ownership illusion. What if your sense of owning your own body is just a guess? Not a fact, but a perception your brain maintains by integrating sensory signals. And what if that perception can be hijacked? In a simple experiment, you sit with one hand hidden from view and a rubber hand placed in front of you. A researcher strokes both your real hand and the rubber hand simultaneously. You see the brush touching the fake hand. You feel the brush touching your real hand. Your brain, trying to make sense of the mismatch, does something strange. It starts treating the rubber hand as yours. This is the body ownership illusion, a phenomenon where the brain reassigns ownership of a fake limb based on synchronized sensory input. The visual information says the rubber hand is being touched. The tactile information says your hand is being touched. The brain resolves the conflict by deciding they're the same hand. After a few minutes of synchronized stroking, most people report that the rubber hand feels like part of their body. If the researcher suddenly strikes the rubber hand with a hammer, you flinch. Your stress response activates as if the threat is directed at you. The brain has integrated the fake hand into your body map. The illusion reveals how fragile the sense of body ownership actually is. You don't own your body because it's physically attached to you. You own it because your brain continuously integrates visual, tactile, and proprioceptive signals and labels the result as self. When those signals align in unexpected ways, the sense of ownership shifts. The brain prioritizes coherence over accuracy. If the visual and tactile signals match, the brain assumes they're coming from the same source, even when that source is a piece of rubber. The system is built to trust synchrony, and that trust can be exploited. And once you understand that body ownership is constructed, not inherent, it raises deeper questions. If your brain can be convinced that a fake hand is yours, what else about your sense of self is just a well-maintained illusion? Rubber hand illusion. You know it's fake. You can see it's rubber. It's sitting on the table in front of you, motionless, obviously not connected to your body. But after a few minutes of watching it being touched while your real hand is touched in sync, something shifts. The rubber hand starts to feel real. Not metaphorically. Physically. You feel ownership over it. And when someone threatens to strike it, you react as if it's part of you. The rubber hand illusion is the specific setup that demonstrates body ownership can be transferred to an object. The mechanism is synchrony. Your eyes see the rubber hand being stroked. Your nerves feel your real hand being stroked. The timing matches. And because the brain assumes that simultaneous sensory signals from the same location refer to the same object, it integrates the rubber hand into your body schema. The effect is measurable. People report sensations in the rubber hand. If asked to point to where their real hand is without looking, they point closer to the rubber hand than to their actual hand. The brain has recalibrated its internal map to include the fake limb. What makes the illusion powerful is how quickly it happens. Within minutes, the brain accepts the rubber hand as part of the body. There's no extended training period. The sensory match is enough to override the visual evidence that the hand is fake. The illusion also demonstrates how malleable the body map is. You'd think the sense of where your body ends would be fixed, stable, hardwired. But it's continuously updated based on incoming signals. And when those signals suggest a different configuration, the brain adapts. Researchers have extended the illusion to other body parts, rubber arms, fake legs, even whole body illusions using virtual reality. The principle remains the same: synchronize the sensory input, and the brain will integrate the foreign object into the sense of self. And the implications go beyond lab experiments. The rubber hand illusion is being explored for prosthetic development, pain management, and rehabilitation. If the brain can accept a fake limb as real, that acceptance might be harnessed to help people adapt to artificial limbs or recover from injury. But it also exposes a vulnerability. Your sense of embodiment, the feeling that your body is yours, can be manipulated with nothing more than a brush and a piece of rubber. The boundary between self and not self is thinner than it seems. Mirror self-misidentification. You see someone in the mirror, but you don't recognize them as yourself. The reflection is of a stranger. You know intellectually that mirrors show your own image. You might even be able to reason through the fact that the person in the mirror must be you. But the recognition doesn't click. The face looking back feels foreign. Mirror self-misidentification is a delusion where you fail to recognize your own reflection. It's most commonly seen in dementia, particularly in later stages when cognitive decline disrupts the systems responsible for self-recognition. But it can also appear after brain injury or in certain psychiatric conditions. The brain identifies your face through a combination of visual recognition and internal self-awareness. You see your reflection and match it to your stored representation of your own appearance. But if the connection between the visual input and the self-concept is severed, the match fails. You see a face, process it as someone else's, and react accordingly. People experiencing mirror self-misidentification may talk to the reflection, believing it's another person. They might become distressed, thinking a stranger is in the room. Or they might show no concern at all, simply treating the reflection as irrelevant. What's unsettling is the specificity. It's not a general failure of facial recognition. The person can often recognize other people. The problem is isolated to their own image. The system that should tag the reflection as a self has broken down, and the face in the mirror becomes just another face. In some cases, people develop narratives to explain the mismatch. They might believe the reflection is a relative, or a past version of themselves, or an imposter. The brain tries to make sense of the visual information by fitting it into a story that doesn't require accepting it as their current self. The condition can fluctuate. Sometimes the recognition is intact. Other times it fails completely. The inconsistency makes the experience more confusing, both for the person experiencing it and for those around them. And for caregivers, it's a reminder of how much we take self-recognition for granted. The ability to look in a mirror and instantly, effortlessly know that the reflection is you feels automatic. But it's a complex integration of memory, visual processing, and self-concept. And when that integration fails, even your own face can become unrecognizable. Delusional misidentification. The person sitting across from you is not your spouse. They look identical. They sound the same. They know everything your spouse would know, but something fundamental is wrong. This is an imposter, a duplicate, a replacement. You can't explain how you know. You just know. The certainty is absolute. Or it's the opposite. Different people keep appearing, but they're all the same person in disguise. The mailman is your neighbor. The cashier is your coworker. They're following you, watching you, shifting their appearance to stay close. The faces change, but the presence remains constant. Delusional misidentification encompasses a range of conditions where the brain fails to correctly identify people, leading to elaborate false beliefs about identity. Capgras and Fregoli are the most well-known forms, but the category is broader. Some people believe they've been replaced by an identical double. Others think familiar people are secretly relatives or strangers are secretly familiar. The underlying mechanism involves a disconnect between recognition systems. The brain processes faces through multiple pathways: visual identification, emotional recognition, contextual memory. When these pathways function together, you see someone and instantly know who they are with emotional certainty. But if the pathways become disconnected, you can recognize a face visually while losing the emotional confirmation that makes the recognition feel real. The brain tries to resolve the mismatch by constructing an explanation. If the emotional signal says, "This isn't the person I know," but the visual signal says, "This looks exactly like them," the brain settles on imposter. The explanation fits the conflicting data better than accepting that the recognition system itself is broken. These delusions are most common after brain injury, in dementia, or during psychotic episodes. The person experiencing them isn't being irrational within their own framework. They're responding logically to faulty input. The data says imposter, so they believe imposter. And once the delusion forms, it's resistant to correction. You can show evidence, photographs, shared memories, logical arguments. But the emotional mismatch persists, and that feeling overrides the facts. The person you're looking at doesn't feel right, and no amount of proof can make that feeling go away. Maladaptive daydreaming. You're in the middle of a conversation when you realize you've been gone for the last several minutes. Not distracted. Gone. Lost in an elaborate internal narrative where you're someone else, somewhere else, living out scenarios that have nothing to do with your actual life. You snap back mid-sentence, trying to reconstruct what was just said while the fantasy still lingers in vivid detail. This isn't ordinary daydreaming. It's maladaptive daydreaming, a condition where fantasy becomes so immersive and compulsive that it interferes with daily functioning. The daydreams are detailed, ongoing, often continuing across days or weeks like episodes of a show. You have characters, plots, emotional arcs. And the pull to return to them is strong enough that you lose hours, neglect responsibilities, withdraw from real-world engagement. The experience is intensely absorbing. When you're in the daydream, it feels more vivid than reality. Emotions are heightened. The narrative is compelling. You're not passively watching a story. You're inside it, experiencing it as if it's happening. The line between imagination and immersion blurs until the daydream feels more real than the room you're sitting in. What makes it maladaptive is the compulsion. You don't choose to daydream. You get pulled into it. And once you're in, it's hard to pull yourself out. The fantasy becomes a refuge, a place where emotions are manageable and outcomes are controllable. But the time it consumes starts eroding your ability to function. People with maladaptive daydreaming often engage in repetitive movements while absorbed. Pacing, rocking, hand gestures. The movement seems to facilitate the immersion, making the fantasy more vivid. Some report needing music or specific triggers to enter the daydream state. Others slip into it without warning, the fantasy overriding whatever they were doing. The content varies. Some people build elaborate fictional worlds. Others replay and revise real events. Some create idealized versions of themselves. The common thread is the depth of absorption and the difficulty disengaging. And the isolation is profound. You can't easily explain the pull of something that exists only in your mind. People see you zoning out, losing time, failing to show up. But they don't see the internal world that's become more compelling than the external one, or the struggle to stay grounded when the daydream is always waiting. Absorption. You're reading a book and the room disappears. You're not aware of turning pages. You're not aware of time passing. You're inside the story, completely absorbed, to the point where sounds don't register and someone can call your name without you hearing. When you finally surface, hours have passed, and you have no memory of the external world during that time. Absorption is the capacity to become fully immersed in experience, losing awareness of surroundings and the passage of time. It's not a disorder. It's a personality trait in variation in how deeply attention can focus. People high in absorption slip easily into books, music, films, even their own thoughts, to the exclusion of everything else. The trait is measured by how often you lose yourself in sensory or imaginative experiences. Do you get so absorbed in a sunset that you forget where you are? Does music transport you completely? Do you lose track of time when working on something engaging? High absorption means the answer is yes, frequently, intensely. What's happening neurologically is a narrowing of attentional focus. Most people maintain a broad awareness even when concentrating. They hear background noise, feel physical sensations, track time loosely. But in high absorption, the focus becomes so exclusive that peripheral awareness shuts down. You're not ignoring distractions. You're genuinely not processing them. Absorption correlates with creativity, empathy, and openness to experience. It also correlates with susceptibility to hypnosis and a tendency toward fantasy. The same mechanism that lets you disappear into a novel also makes you more likely to blur the line between imagination and reality. It's not inherently problematic. The ability to fully engage with experience is often a strength. But it comes with vulnerabilities. High absorption makes you more prone to dissociation under stress, more susceptible to suggestion, more likely to mistake imagined events for real ones. And it creates a strange relationship with reality. You can be fully present one moment and completely absent the next, lost in internal experience while the external world continues without you. The boundary between engagement and escape becomes porous, and you're never quite sure which side you're on. Fantasy proneness. You have vivid memories of events that never happened. Conversations with people you've never met. Places you've never been but can describe in perfect detail. The line between what you imagined and what you experienced has become so blurred that you can't reliably separate them anymore. Fantasy proneness is a trait characterized by extensive, vivid, and deeply immersive fantasy life. People high in fantasy proneness spend significant time in imagined scenarios, and those scenarios are so detailed and emotionally engaging that they feel real. The boundary between fantasy and reality doesn't just blur, it breaks down. This isn't occasional daydreaming. It's a pervasive pattern. Fantasy-prone individuals report spending hours per day in elaborate internal worlds. They create characters, storylines, entire alternate realities that feel as vivid as lived experience. And because the fantasies are so detailed, memories of them can be mistaken for memories of actual events. The trait often develops in childhood, sometimes as a response to isolation, boredom, or a need for escape. The fantasy world becomes a refuge, a place where control and meaning are easier to access. But as the habit deepens, the distinction between imagined and real starts to fade. Fantasy proneness correlates with high absorption, creativity, and openness to unusual experiences. It also correlates with increased suggestibility and a higher likelihood of reporting paranormal or mystical experiences. The same vivid imagination that creates rich internal worlds also makes external experiences feel more intense and meaningful. What makes it challenging is the memory confusion. You remember things vividly, but you're not sure if they happened, or if you imagined them so intensely that they feel like they happened. Did you have that conversation, or did you rehearse it so thoroughly in your mind that the rehearsal became the memory? The uncertainty erodes confidence in your own recollection. People high in fantasy proneness aren't delusional in the clinical sense. They can usually recognize, when pressed, that the fantasies aren't real. But the emotional and sensory vividness makes the distinction feel arbitrary. If something feels as real as lived experience, does it matter whether it technically happened? And the trait creates isolation. You can't easily share a rich internal life that others can't access or verify. You learn to keep the fantasies private, navigating a reality that feels less vivid than the one you've built inside your own mind. Reality monitoring error. Did you lock the door, or did you just think about locking the door? Did you send that email, or did you draft it in your head and forget to hit send? You remember the action. You can picture yourself doing it. But you can't remember whether it actually happened, or whether you only imagined it happening. A reality monitoring error is a failure to distinguish between memories of real events and memories of imagined events. The brain stores both types of memory using similar structures, and if the markers distinguishing them degrade, you can mistake one for the other. Normally, memories of real events carry more sensory detail and contextual information. You remember not just what happened, but the peripheral details, the lighting, the sounds, the physical sensations. Imagined events are typically less detailed, more focused on the core action without the surrounding context. Your brain uses these differences to tag memories as real or imagined. But the tags aren't foolproof. If you imagine something vividly enough, especially repeatedly, the memory can accumulate detail that makes it feel real. You visualize locking the door so many times that the visualization becomes as detailed as an actual memory. When you later try to recall whether you locked it, the imagined memory and the real memory look similar, and you can't tell which is which. Reality monitoring errors increase with age, stress, and distraction. The system that maintains the distinction between real and imagined requires cognitive resources. When those resources are depleted, the errors multiply. The consequences range from trivial to significant. Forgetting whether you turned off the stove is inconvenient. Misremembering whether you said something aloud or only thought it can damage relationships. Confusing imagination with action in high-stakes contexts. Medical decisions, legal testimony, can have serious implications. And once you've experienced enough reality monitoring errors, trust in your own memory erodes. You start second-guessing everything. Did that conversation happen, or did you imagine how it would go? Did you complete that task, or did you just plan to? The line between intention and action, between thought and reality, becomes unreliable. Source monitoring error. You tell someone a story. They interrupt. I told you that story last week. You're certain you read it somewhere. But they insist it came from them, and now you're not sure. The information is accurate. You remember learning it. But you've lost track of where it came from. A source monitoring error is a failure to correctly recall the origin of a memory. You remember the content but misattribute the source. You think you read something when you actually heard it. You believe an idea is yours when you absorbed it from someone else. The information is intact. The context is scrambled. The brain encodes memories with source tags, where, when, and how you learned something. But those tags are fragile. Over time they fade. The content persists, but the origin gets stripped away. When you retrieve the memory later, you have to reconstruct the source, and that reconstruction is vulnerable to error. Source monitoring errors are behind cryptomnesia, the phenomenon where you accidentally reproduce someone else's work believing it's original. They're also why eyewitnesses misidentify where they saw a suspect. They remember the face, but they misremember whether they saw it at the crime scene or in a photo lineup later. The errors become more frequent as memories age. Recent memories have stronger source tags. Older memories have degraded tags, making misattribution more likely. Stress and distraction also weaken source encoding, increasing the chance you'll remember the content but lose the context. What makes source errors insidious is that the content feels reliable. The memory itself is clear. You're confident about what you know. But confidence in content doesn't guarantee accuracy about source, and that mismatch creates problems when the source matters. In everyday life, source errors are mostly harmless. You forget whether you learned something from a podcast or an article. You credit the wrong person with a joke. But in contexts where origin matters, academic work, legal proceedings, personal relationships, the errors can distort truth in ways that are difficult to untangle. And because source memory is reconstructed rather than retrieved intact, you can become convinced of an incorrect source with the same certainty you'd have about a correct one. The brain fills the gap, and the fill feels real, leaving you defending a source attribution that never happened. Hypnopompic hallucination. Your eyes open. You're awake. The room is visible, familiar, but there's something else in the room with you. A figure standing by the door, or a pattern crawling across the ceiling, or a face hovering inches from yours. You're fully conscious. You know you're awake. But the image doesn't vanish. It stays vivid and solid until suddenly it dissolves into nothing. Hypnopompic hallucinations occur during the transition from sleep to wakefulness. They're the mirror of hypnagogic hallucinations, which happen while falling asleep. But hypnopompic hallucinations feel more jarring because you're waking up into them. You're not drifting towards sleep, you're emerging from it, and the dream imagery is still there, layered over reality. The brain is shifting states. REM sleep, where vivid dreams occur, is ending. Wakefulness is beginning. But the two states overlap. Your eyes are open and processing the real room. But the dream generation system is still active, projecting images, sounds, or sensations that aren't there. The content varies. Some people see shapes, shadows, or geometric patterns. Others see fully formed figures, people, animals, faces. The hallucinations can be silent or accompanied by sounds. Some report feeling a presence or sensing movement. The vividness is what makes them disturbing. You're awake enough to know they shouldn't be there, but not awake enough to dismiss them. The experience is brief. Within seconds or minutes, full wakefulness takes over and the hallucination fades. But the jolt of waking up to something impossible lingers. You're not sure, in the moment, whether you're still dreaming or whether what you're seeing is real. Hypnopompic hallucinations are more common in people with irregular sleep schedules, sleep deprivation, or certain sleep disorders. But they can happen to anyone. The brain just needs the right conditions. A moment where waking and dreaming overlap, leaving you conscious enough to see but not awake enough to filter out the dream. Intrusive imagery. An image appears in your mind. You didn't summon it. You don't want it there. But it's vivid, disturbing, and persistent. You try to push it away, but the effort only makes it stronger. The harder you fight to not see it, the more clearly it appears. Intrusive imagery is the unwanted emergence of distressing or disturbing mental images. They're not hallucinations. You're not seeing them in the external world. They're internal, but they feel intrusive, like thoughts that don't belong to you. The content is often violent, disturbing, or taboo. Images of harm, danger, or scenarios you would never choose to imagine. The brain generates these images through the same mechanisms it uses for regular imagination. But intrusive imagery differs in two ways. It's unwanted, and it's resistant to suppression. You don't choose to think about these things. And when you try to stop thinking about them, the images become more persistent. This is partly due to how suppression works. When you try not to think about something, part of your brain monitors for that thought to make sure you're not thinking it. But the monitoring process itself requires bringing the thought to mind, which reinforces it. The more you try to suppress the image, the more frequently it surfaces. Intrusive imagery is common in anxiety disorders, OCD, PTSD, and depression. But it also occurs in people without diagnosed conditions, especially during periods of stress. The content doesn't reflect your desires or intentions. It's the brain misfiring, generating disturbing material that gets stuck in a loop of attempted suppression and reinforced presence. What makes intrusive imagery distressing isn't just the content. It's the sense of loss of control. Your mind feels like it's betraying you, producing images you find repulsive and refusing to let them go. And because the images are disturbing, you start questioning why your brain is generating them, which creates secondary anxiety about what it means that you're thinking these things. The images can be triggered by external cues or appear spontaneously. Once they start, they can dominate mental space, making it hard to focus on anything else. The person experiencing them knows the images aren't real and doesn't want them. But knowing that doesn't make them stop. Sense of foreshadowing. Something is about to happen. You don't know what. You can't explain why you think it. But the feeling is there, hovering just beneath awareness. A vague sense that the present moment is building towards something, that events are aligning in a way that will culminate soon. Then nothing happens. The feeling fades, leaving no evidence it was ever pointing toward anything real. The sense of foreshadowing is a feeling of anticipation without specific content. It's the perception that something significant is imminent, even when there's no logical reason to expect it. The feeling can be neutral, anxious, or ominous, but it always carries weight, as if reality is about to shift. The brain generates this sensation by detecting patterns and extrapolating them into predictions. You're constantly processing environmental cues, social signals, and internal states to predict what's coming next. Most of this processing is unconscious. You don't notice the pattern recognition happening. You just feel the result, a vague sense that something is building. But sometimes the prediction system misfires. It detects a pattern that isn't there, or it assigns significance to random fluctuations. You get the feeling of impending change without any actual evidence that change is coming. The anticipation is real. The event it's pointing toward isn't. This feeling is more common during periods of uncertainty or stress. When the environment is unstable, the brain becomes hypervigilant, scanning for signs of what's next. The heightened scanning increases the likelihood of false positives. Seeing patterns where none exist, feeling foreshadowing where there's only noise. People describe it as a sense of something in the air. A feeling that today is different, that events are converging. Some interpret it as intuition. Others recognize it as a perceptual quirk. Either way, the feeling is compelling enough that it's hard to dismiss, even when nothing materializes. And when something does happen after the feeling, confirmation bias kicks in. You remember the foreshadowing and interpret the event as proof that the feeling was real. But you forget all the times you felt foreshadowing and nothing followed. The hits are memorable. The misses fade, and the sense of foreshadowing, inaccurate as it is, feels validated. Uncanny familiarity. The place is new. You've never been here before. But walking through it feels wrong in a way you can't name. Not déjà vu. not the sensation that you've been here. Just a creeping sense that this place is familiar in a way it shouldn't be. Like you're recognizing something you've never seen. Uncanny familiarity is a subtler version of recognition error. It's not the full conviction of déjà vu. It's a background unease, a feeling that something about the environment matches something in your memory without any clear match. The familiarity is partial, fragmented, just strong enough to feel present but not strong enough to identify. The brain might be picking up on structural similarities, spatial layouts, lighting patterns, sound textures, that echo previous experiences. You've been in spaces that share features with this one. The brain detects the overlap and signals familiarity. But because the match is partial and spread across multiple memories, you can't pinpoint what feels familiar. You're left with the feeling without the explanation. It can happen with places, faces, situations. You meet someone new and they feel oddly familiar. Not because they look like someone you know, but because something about their mannerisms, their voice, the way they hold themselves, triggers recognition without clear reference. The sense is unsettling because it suggests connection where none should exist. What makes uncanny familiarity different from ordinary recognition is the emotional quality. Normal familiarity is comfortable. This is disorienting. It carries a sense of wrongness, as if the brain is trying to fit the present into a category it doesn't quite belong to. The recognition is incomplete, and the incompleteness creates tension. Some interpret the feeling as meaningful, sign of past lives, parallel timelines, intuitive knowledge. Others recognize it as a glitch in pattern matching. Either way, the sensation persists. The environment feels known and unknown at the same time, and the contradiction doesn't resolve. Perceptual aberration. Objects look slightly off, not hallucinatory, not clearly distorted, just wrong in subtle ways. Proportions seem skewed. Distances feel uncertain. Faces appear strange, like you're seeing them from an angle that doesn't exist. The world is still recognizable, but the recognition comes with effort. Something fundamental about how you're processing sensory input has shifted. Perceptual aberration is a broad term for subtle distortions in perception that don't rise to the level of full hallucination. It's the sense that reality is being filtered through a system that's not calibrating correctly. Shapes, colors, spatial relationships, all slightly off, creating a world that feels unstable. The brain processes sensory information through layers of interpretation. Raw visual data gets organized into objects, distances, movements. Normally, this interpretation is seamless. But if the systems responsible for organizing sensory input are stressed, fatigued, or misfiring, the organization becomes less reliable. You still see objects, but the way they're assembled into coherent perception feels wrong. Perceptual aberrations occur in schizophrenia, during migraines, under extreme fatigue, or in dissociative states. They also appear in some people as a baseline trait, a tendency toward unusual perceptual experiences that don't interfere with functioning, but create a persistent sense that perception is fragile. The distortions can be visual, auditory, or tactile. Sounds might seem to come from the wrong direction. Touch might feel muted or amplified. Time might stretch or compress. The world is still there, still coherent enough to navigate. But the coherence feels conditional, like it could unravel if you look too closely. What makes perceptual aberration unsettling is the awareness that your senses aren't fully reliable. You can't trust that what you're seeing is accurate. You start second-guessing basic perceptions. Is that object really that far away? Is that person's face actually shaped like that? The uncertainty compounds, making the world feel less solid. Anomalous experience. You can't categorize what just happened. It doesn't fit into hallucination, illusion, or memory error. It was real enough to feel undeniable but strange enough that you can't explain it. A moment where perception, cognition, or awareness broke from normal patterns in a way that leaves you questioning what you just experienced. Anomalous experiences are events that fall outside the boundaries of ordinary perception and cognition. They're not necessarily pathological. They're just unusual, moments where the brain processes reality in ways that don't align with consensus experience. Some people report them frequently. Others never do, but the defining feature is the sense that something genuinely strange just occurred. The content varies widely. Seeing something that shouldn't be possible. Feeling a presence when alone. Experiencing time in a non-linear way. Knowing something you have no way of knowing. The experiences resist simple categorization because they don't fit cleanly into known perceptual or cognitive glitches. Neuroscience explains some of these events as rare combinations of normal processes, dissociation plus pattern recognition, or memory retrieval plus misattribution. But the explanations don't always capture the subjective quality of the experience. The person experiencing it isn't just having a perceptual error. They're having an experience that feels fundamentally different from ordinary consciousness. Anomalous experiences are more common during altered states. Fatigue, meditation, grief, high emotion. The brain is operating outside its normal parameters, and that creates space for unusual perceptual and cognitive events. Some people interpret these experiences as spiritual or paranormal. Others see them as neurological quirks. The interpretation shapes how the experience is remembered and integrated. What ties anomalous experiences together is the aftermath. You can't easily dismiss what happened. It was too vivid, too specific, too outside normal bounds. You're left with a memory of something that doesn't fit into your understanding of how perception and cognition work. And that gap, between what you experienced and what you can explain, stays with you, a reminder that the boundary between ordinary and extraordinary is thinner than it seems.